Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be taking a quick look at the Z mount 70-200 2.8. Okay, so let's just talk a bit about this lens. It's obviously a 70-200 2.8, it's a full frame lens, 2.8 all the way through when you're zooming in and out. It also has VR, so it's the first Z series kind of full frame lens that has VR built into it, and it's also going to use the in-body stabilization in the camera as well, and it does a really good job at that. I've been able to use this camera at 200mm on a Z7 shooting with a shutter speed of 1/10 of a second handheld, and the images look as if I just used a faster shutter speed. They are incredibly sharp. So this, as a combination of VR and in-body stabilization, is definitely going to allow you to shoot at slower shutter speeds than you normally would. We then have two separate function rings. So we have one here at the back, one here, which is actually can either be a function ring or a manual focusing ring, so you can set that to what you want it to be. We then have the display button, which allows us to change and cycle through different displays on the lens. And then you'll see that there are multiple lens function buttons. So first of all, you have lens function 1. That can be customized to whatever you want that to be. And then you'll see that you have lens function 2. And lens function 2 wraps around the lens. So you've got one here, you have one then on the top of the lens, and one on the right-hand side of the lens, and also one directly underneath the bottom of the lens as well. So there are 4 different buttons to push to get to lens function 2. Then you'll notice that the zoom ring is obviously right at the front of the lens. This obviously replicates the layout that we had for the F-mount FL. So with the FL, they switched the focusing ring and the zoom ring around. That matches that layout. And personally, I think that's a good thing to do. I would prefer to shoot that way. Generally, when I'm holding the lens, I've got the camera in my right hand, the lens I hold at the end of the lens anyway. I don't want to hold it further back and try and move the zoom lens further back. I want to have that right at the end of the lens. Ergonomically, that makes way more sense to me. I'd rather be shooting in a situation where I can hold the camera with my right hand and then support the lens with my left hand and zoom in and out really nice and simply like this. If the zoom lens is further back, I would probably have to move the foot out of the way and then hold the lens further back closer to the body. That is just way more unstable for me. I don't like that at all. So I much prefer the layout of having that zoom ring at the front. Yes, if you're used to kind of the older VR2 70-200 lenses from Nikon, it does take a bit of getting used to, but trust me, when you get used to it, the flexibility and the managing of the weight of the lens in the body is much, much more stable. So that to me is a positive, to be honest. One thing I wanted to get across as well is actually how well this kind of sits on the body. Even though you've got a smaller grip on the side, actually, obviously when you're shooting, you would have that camera set up, left hand supporting the weight of the lens, you can zoom in and out, and then your right hand is free to kind of move around. I actually quite like the foot sitting in the palm of my hand. That works well for me. But I do know a lot of photographers will move the foot out of the way so they can sit their palm flat. Just depends on what's going to be easier for you. I just think that becomes just a bit easier when you lock the foot down. But even saying that, just the weight of the lens and the feel of the lens, there's not a lot of the weight to the front. So it just fits really nicely. It's kind of nice and easy to move around, even with just one wrist on the camera. The grip is big enough to have enough for grip on the camera and then still move the camera and the lens around. It's not like you've got a bigger, heavier lens on the front of it. And that is in stark contrast as to when we have the FTZ and the F-mount FL. I definitely feel like it's pulling on my wrist. I am struggling to keep that gripped a lot more than I am with the Z series lens. It does feel like there's a lot more weight at the end of the FTZ adapter. So it is just ever so slightly shifting that weight further away from the body because there's no weight in the FTZ adapter. So it does feel like I would need to support that lens much more, and I definitely do feel more comfortable moving the Z series 70-200 2.8 lens around versus the F-mount 70-200 lens around on a Z series camera. And yes, when we look at these lenses side by side, so when we compare the Z mount 70-200 versus the FL F-mount 70-200, it would appear that the Z mount lens is bigger, and that is the case. However, you obviously can't use the F-mount lens on a Z series without the FTZ adapter. That FTZ adapter makes the F-mount lens bigger, longer. A lot of you have said, well, it looks like an F-mount lens and they've just basically integrated an FTZ adapter onto the back of it, and that is definitely not the case. It is a whole new design of lens. The glass at the back of the lens starts at a different point. There is obviously a space in the back of the lens. That's not because they've just didn't put a FTZ adapter there. That's for something else. There are a couple of things to note. So I did use this lens on a body that had an older firmware version, and in that case, it didn't allow me to adjust the camera's VR on and off in the camera menu. I had to do that firmware update to 2.2 to allow me to see that this lens had VR. So just keep that in mind. If you are using this and you've had a body for a long time and you've not done a firmware update, please make sure you update your camera's firmware to when you use this lens. You'll also see on the side of the lens that we have a focusing switch for automatic and manual focus. We also then have the ability to limit the focusing distance, so we either have full, the close range to long distance, or we can choose from 5 meters to infinity. So if you know your subject isn't going to be closer than 5 meters, it allows us to adjust the lens accordingly. The lens's closest focusing distance when it's 70 is half a meter. When it's at 200, it's just less than a meter. One of the questions I did get is the foot of the FL lens the same as the foot on the Z series lens? And no, they're not. They are completely different. So if you've bought a foot for the FL lens, it's not all of a sudden going to be able to attach onto the Z series lens. The foot size, shape and weight and the attachment point is effectively a different size altogether. So they will not fit together, unfortunately. Also, the Z series foot is not an Arca Swiss foot. It is just a standard shaped foot. So when it comes to picture quality, I know there's going to be a lot of you that are interested in picture quality. One of obviously the main reasons of buying this lens. I will do a full picture quality video against the 70-200 FL F-mount lens versus this, the Z mount lens. It's got a lot to stand up to. The 70-200 F-mount lens is known as being one of the best 70-200s you can already buy. So it's got a lot to stand up to be better than this lens, and it is better than the FL. As hard as that is to say, when you look at them side by side, the Z series lens is sharper than the F-mount 70-200 2.8 FL lens. There's no doubt about that. At 200mm, at 700mm, wide open at 2.8, the Z series lens is definitely sharper. As I mentioned, I will do a whole video on that, showing you those differences, but right now, the Z series lens is the optically better lens, which makes sense. That's been the case for a lot of lenses that have launched for the Z series. They've always been better than their F-mount counterparts. I get that this F-mount lens is one of the best F-mount lenses you can get, so there's a lot of people out there that think you can't really get much better than this lens. And I get that, but there is a difference. You can see the difference between the two lenses. We do also have, like the knocked under this flap on the collar of the lens, there is a Kensington lock as well. So if you do need to lock this lens down, you can. It's obviously something that Nikon are doing in a lot of their lenses and adding into obviously high-priced items that people just want to lock down if they use them in kind of sports event or out in the public. This lens has had a small delay applied to it, but that is nothing to do with any changes to the lens itself. There's been an issue with the production of the lens itself, so it's a production issue, not an issue with the lens. There's nothing they need to figure out in terms of an error in the lens or the optical design or anything like that. So it hopefully won't be too long, but yes, there has been a delay in the first shipment of these lenses. If you're watching this video a couple of months from now, you're probably already able to go and buy one off the shelf, for example. So for those of you that have pre-ordered, yep, you've got to wait a little longer, but it is worth it. And I hope that you guys will think it's worth it when you get it as well. It is going to be quite possibly the best 70-200 2.8 you can get from anywhere. And that's a pretty bold statement because every 70-200 is a really good 70-200 2.8. I've spent a little bit of time with this lens. I have been out shooting with it, and it just happens to be that whenever I get a new lens and I start shooting with it, that I always then end up getting it wet. So it worked perfectly fine in that situation in a light bit of rain. As you would expect, the weather sealing is fantastic, so there's no issues from there. Right, I've done some size comparisons with different lenses, different bodies, to give you an idea of the size of this lens, so we can go take a look at some of those size comparisons now. also just wanted to talk about its form factor. Obviously, this lens, when it zooms in and out, it doesn't extend or get bigger or smaller. Some people see that as an advantage or a disadvantage. I personally prefer this way. Generally speaking, it means that I know the size of the lens. When I'm packing that lens in my bag, I've got the space for the lens. Obviously, if it was a lens that collapses smaller, when you're using it, it still extends further. And it also means that I can't hold the lens at the full extent of the lens, because the ring is generally where you would hold the lens. And I generally kind of prefer that form factor for a 2.8 lens. I am all for it in a position where if we were looking at a lens that might be a 70-200 f4, if that lens was collapsible to make it smaller, so it kind of extended when it zoomed in and out, I'm all for that. I thoroughly want that to be a thing that exists. If you are interested in my photography and you want to know what I get up to with all these lenses and all this stuff as well, then follow me on my Instagram account where I generally post some of my images. I'll also post all the settings I use, some tips about filters, what lens I'm using, what tripod I'm using, and I'll generally add to kind of my Instagram stories as well if I'm out about shooting as well. So if you're interested in my photography and interested in kind of seeing the kit being used more than I show you guys kind of through my YouTube channel, then so my Instagram is where you'd go and see that, and I'll put a link to that in the description below, or I'll put it here somewhere. See how that works. Right, I hope that you found this video useful. There's going to be a lot more content on this 70-200, mainly obviously videos to do with picture quality. So I'm going to be comparing it directly to the F-mount FL 70-200 2.8, so that you guys can see the difference in picture quality. As I mentioned, just from what I've looked at, it is sharper than the F-mount lens. No focus breathing on it either, so I'll make some videos looking at the quality of this lens versus the F-mount, the same way they have for done a lot of the other lens videos as well. I do hope that you have found this quick look interesting. I do hope that you have found it useful. If you do have any questions, then please do comment them below. If you like this video, then please do subscribe. As I mentioned, there's a lot more 70-200 stuff on the way. There's a lot of other videos on the way, just some cool stuff as well. So thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.